It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ralph, not just because I think he's such a fantastic person, but he is a really talented artist, designer, and activist. So Ralph, he spent some time in Trinity. He did a PhD here, so I know him since that time. But he's currently working, I suppose, as an artist, what you're going to see now. He's involved in making beer. I like the way he throws that in. He's also a postdoc in Cape Town University, working on a project called Global Arenas of Knowledge. And I was totally unsurprised when I found that Ralph was working on this project, because it's a project which is all about, I suppose, challenging kind of the certain worldview where the global north kind of dominates that view. And ever since I've known Ralph, not alone has his art been fascinating, but he has always managed to use it, I suppose, to question things around him. And I think that kind of activist spirit is something that he really embraces and comes through a lot of what he does. And I think that's what, you know, lends him to being, I suppose, such an interesting artist. Ralph, when he was working in the centre that I work in, his PhD was entitled Radical Plumbers and Clay Pumps. And I have to say, I never had a PhD student who had such a creative title of their thesis. And in that as well, he was kind of really, really challenging design processes, and who had the right to design for what circumstances. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing this. We're going to start with about a half an hour's talk from Ralph. We'll then move on to a few questions and open it to the floor. So I hope everyone will be storing up good questions to ask, and I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is the first time I've been in the Science Gallery for about 3 years, but I used to do quite a few projects here, and I was here for 5 years in Dublin as a PhD student with Linda. So yeah, I wanted to thank Linda for hosting tonight's event. The project is called African Robots. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and that's where most of this work has taken place. And I'm over here while an exhibition of mine is on in London at a British Council Make a Library space for African robots. And that's a little circuit, sort of type incorporating a circuit for that LED. And the little image of a bird is the second in a series of Starlings that I've made as robots. So just to thank Connect for bringing me here, and Science Gallery, and also the SA UK Seasons Fund, which brought me from South Africa too. The way I'm going to do this presentation is by first giving a narrative, so sort of telling the story of the project, and during that I'll reflect on aspects of it, and at the end we'll also look back then on ways I think about the project. In terms of storytelling, this is perhaps the start of the project. This is a wirework car that I made when I was 14 as a high school kid in Zimbabwe. So I don't know if you've all seen wire cars. They're a pretty iconic kind of African thing that kids make all in different parts of Africa. And they sort of race them down the roads, usually on like a wooden pole or a wire pole. And I saw those when I was a kid, and I was just really liked them. I like the economy of material in working with wire, that you can take a reel of fencing wire, just a very almost two-dimensional material, and with very little material you can make a three-dimensional form. And something I found out from working with wire workers in Cape Town is that for Zimbabwean kids, when they're making wire cars, if they want to have the best car, they give their pocket money to another kid who's good at making cars, and they buy a car from them, and there's this kind of rivalry. And that's how some wire workers in Zimbabwe and Cape Town got their start, is by selling wire cars to their friends when they were kids, and because they were good at doing it. So yeah, I don't think anybody would have been buying my car, but as a start. So that's supposed to be a Citroen 2CV, by the way. That was a kind of a start, an interest. That was when I was 14. I then went on to go to art school as an undergraduate. I did my master's in a program at NYU called the Interactive Telecommunications Program, where I learned about electronics. And some while after that, I did my PhD here, looking at an intersection of art, design, and technology. Then in 2013, I'd been thinking about this idea for a while of combining street wire work, and I'm going to show you some references for what that looks like. crafters on the streets in Cape Town and South Africa sell little objects made of wire and beads and so on. And I thought it would be interesting to cross wire workers with cell phone repair markets. So you also have people on the streets repairing cell phones. And I thought, what if you could use cell phone batteries and motors and lights and combine them with craft and make little animatronic devices? So as an experiment to start with, I made this bird. So this is supposed to be a starling. A starling is an indigenous bird to Cape Town, as well as in other parts of the world. And they're very clever urban birds. And I thought they'd make a good subject for a robot because, yeah, like the crows, they're capable of learning, and they're very sort of like nimble little birds. So this bird runs on a cell phone battery and has a servo motor inside it, and it just does simple head and wing movements. I executed this project. I'd actually first framed the idea of this project in about 2006. I'd written it into an application, and I only got to start working on it in 2013. And it was partly due to this guy, Henrik Nirachka. And he was a master's student at the Design Interaction program at Royal College of Art in London, a student of Anthony Dunn's, the critical design professor who I also wrote about in my PhD. So he emailed me in South Africa and said he's looking to do an internship. And I said he could come to my studio for a month and make the first prototype for this project. So he came and started working on the project. And then more recently, he put together a zine for the project, which is on exhibition in London. And I thought I could use this as a way of showing you a bit of the influences on the project. So as part of his work, he helped make the Starling, and then he also put together this little document that describes it. The way he's structured the zine, it's called a split zine because it works from two directions. So he has his thesis, Culturetronics, which was the thesis he wrote partly out of this experience, coming from the one end, and he has an account of making Starling from the other end. So he focuses on the way we wanted to use cell phones and wire work. So that the zine has a structure of where A is the handicraft and B is the cell phone repair networks. And through the structure of the zine, he brings A and B together in the form of the Starling. So on the left is a pile of wire work and bead toys that people make on the street. On the right are cell phone parts in an informal cell phone repair place. These are examples of wire work in South Africa. So on the right are kind of like a trophy head made of beads and wire. So you can see the way that wire work has a bit of a play on wireframe in 3D, which I think is an interesting digital analog kind of crossover. And when we made Starling, we actually made it as a 3D model first. We downloaded a free model of a bird, tweaked it a bit to make it like a Starling, printed it out in sections, and gave the patterns to a wire worker to make. That was how we made the first thing. So these are flowers that are made of wire work, and rabbits, and the heads. And then these are cell phone repair shops in Cape Town. So actually the idea of using cell phones, as I say, I first framed it in 2006, and cell phones were quite a bit simpler in 2006 than they are now, like 9 years later. So I was looking at Nokias, and they had more easily accessible parts. Now the idea of using cell phones is a bit trickier because everything is so integrated into the circuit boards. But these are cell phone speakers. We extracted parts out of the cell phones and thought, how could we use these various things? So like cell phone ringers and microphones. Starling has a cell phone speaker is what it runs on. And we bought a phone for €10 to take apart and try. So then the idea is A plus B, how could we introduce cell phone repair workers to wire workers? So I guess what you could call the part of the project, some of this project now, I'll show you exceptions to it, is trying to produce prototypes that demonstrate the idea, as well as working with wire workers to actually make work with them. But it's also a demonstration. This is a wooden moving tricycle toy made by a homeless man in Cape Town. I buy some of his work, but it looks almost like a sort of Japanese robot. That's a helicopter I bought in Mozambique about 20 years ago that has a battery that runs the motor. just references of toys. And there's the beginning of Starling as a 3D construction. And us outputting patterns for it, creating circuits. And then you get AB, 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 AB. So you have the joining of the two things. And there's the bird talking to its cousins. And the other person involved in this, Dube Chipongara. He is a wire worker from Zimbabwe who lives in Cape Town. So I basically just go out and talk to people who sell their work at the traffic lights and get to know them, and then either commission work by showing them something I'd like made and agreeing a price, or they come to my workshop and we work together on making them. So Dube's worked on the first Starling, and he's worked on the more recent projects as well. So that's Starling 1.0. And that's Starling 1.1. So we made another Starling in response to a request from British Council Make a Library Network that has some design improvements on the first one. It runs on a hacked MP3 player to make a sound, so it has a recording of a Starling and makes a more realistic sound. It has a kind of transparent backplate that's made of a bottle, so it looks kind of space age or something. I always liked it when I had Lego and you had transparent pieces in the Lego, so I wanted to capture some of that excitement in the bird. And now I'm working on Starling 1.2, of which this is a work in progress. This is on a show as a work in progress in London. You can see I'm making more aesthetic decisions around the kind of colorful plate inside the bird. I also used a hacked toy for sound, so I took a Chinese bird toy and took it apart and used that for the sound. And it's got a cell phone embedded in it, so it's got like a cell phone battery and half of a cell phone body embedded in the underside of the bird. So that's Starling. So Starling is a kind of a project that's my work, really, I guess. So it's something that I focus on, and I commission people to work on it. And it's something that I'm keeping on advancing. The other projects I'm going to show you are more collaborative projects with other people. So for HIFA 2015, HIFA is the Harare International Festival of the Arts. It's held every year in Harare in April. So I got funding from Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Development Corporation, to go to Harare and make some African robots with crafters who were already on the festival. And this is a photograph of wire workers in Harare taking apart electronic toys that I'd bought in Brazil on a research trip for the Global Arenas project that Linda mentioned. So while I was there for my university, I did a bit of a side trip and went and bought some toys. This is a picture from Brazil of this is like a multi-story market in Brazil where they sell all kinds of like Chinese toys cheap, and we bought some of these and took them apart. These are now images of people taking apart toys like a novelty soccer ball that moves and makes a sound, and I've got some videos of these things. This is Booker and Farai, who made a caterpillar truck out of a cat toy. I'll show you a video of how that works. These guys took apart a dancing cow that I bought on the streets of Cape Town and made it into a gumboot dancer worker. This is a guy who made a bicycle. This crazy frog is very popular. Lots of people in London have been interested in this one, so I'll show you a video of that. And that's me with the guys working there. So in each case, I did in Harare, we did an exhibition of the work that we made during the festival, in which each artist duo is credited with the work, and the work is titled and described and so on. And I think that's something that's quite important with working with crafters, is that often they're made anonymous in projects by artists. And I definitely want this type of work to be about crediting the authors of it, while it's also a collaborative process. And that's why I make the distinction with something like Starling is my project, which other people work on. These projects is their projects, which I'm helping them to do. This is the dancing cow. And Let me show you a picture of the source material. Okay, so that was like a dancing cow on the streets of Cape Town. For some reason, those dancing cows are sold all over the world by many Chinese toy companies manufactured in different factories, and they all sing this song called Primetime Sex Crime by a group called Earphones, which is like some Metal House from 2005. I have no idea why, but and when the artists made the worker with his spade, I said, you know, we can disconnect the sound if you want. And they said, no, workers always listen to music when they're working, so we'd like to keep the sound. And in fact, working with wire workers, they do always listen to music. This is a little cat, and that's the caterpillar truck that the workers made out of the cat. So, yeah, so that's on the streets in Brazil, and that is in Harare. And just for your interest, this here is
the one trick that your dad was saying.
It's a basic motor toy. What we did is actually some footage here of my dad. My dad is a computer science lecturer in Harare, and he set up this basic motor demonstration where you can use a battery, a magnet, and a coil of wire, and you can make stuff move. So we did that with the wire work as well, where that's running simply on a magnet, a coil of wire, and a battery. So that was the first exercise in the workshop. And it indicates that part of what I'm aiming to do with these workshops, and I think I'm just scratching the surface so far, is introducing the very basis of knowledge around mechanics and electronics, which has been around for hundreds of years. Some with mechanics has been around for thousands of years, and very few of us probably know how those things work. So I think it would be hugely empowering if we knew more about the fundamentals, and then it doesn't become a matter of having the latest technology to enact it. If you understand the principles, you can do it yourself. That's part of what I was getting at in a kind of rough idea of a syllabus for what I was doing at the Harare workshops, is looking at the history of this area of activity. So automata is a kind of an art form, or an art and technology form that goes back a very long way. The top left image is by the Islamic scholar Jazari, who published his book of mechanical inventions in the 1100s. And it's thought that his work influenced Leonardo da Vinci when he came to invent some of his devices. So it's hundreds of examples of how you can make things move, make little toys and contraptions. And in fact, that top left one is regarded as perhaps the first hint of a computer, because it has a piano roll device that you can change the pegs on, and the musicians will play different things. That's a little jeweled caterpillar from the French court, and that's a shitting goose that was popular as well in France. It's fake. They pretended that you could feed it and that it would shit, but actually you had to shove the shit in the back of the goose before it would work. But I'd kind of like to revive an interest in automata. Then we also look at mechanics. So this is a kind of a syllabus of what we looked at in the courses. So basic mechanisms. There are 6 basic, what they call simple machines, out of which other more complex machines are made of. So we looked at that, like levers, cams, pulleys. We looked at basic electronics. So one of the premises of the project is that as wire is a very cheap material that with the right skill you can make into something quite amazing, chips are so cheap and so ubiquitous and manufactured in such large quantities that by having the knowledge to put them together, you can also make something quite amazing with them with very little resources. But knowledge and skill is the key, and that's what the wire workers are really interested in when I work with them, is they recognize that completely, that way of thinking. They can see, well, it doesn't cost much, but you have to know how to do it. And we're also interested in looking at form, and part of what I'm trying to do is this is a kind of an intervention, like an artistic intervention. A feature of wire worker culture is that they constantly innovate, and when new designs appear on the streets in Cape Town, if they're popular, then immediately other wire workers start making them, and they spread in a viral way. So what I'm interested in doing is dropping little bits of influence into that and seeing if it catches on, and if it turns out to be useful to people, then you'll see those designs getting replicated. Again, on the left, that's from the Renaissance. It's like a wireframe rendering of a vase. So it's from several hundred years ago of people thinking about things in terms of wireframe structures. And we're also interested in looking at patterns in terms of ways in which we can create interesting surfaces. So that's a computer punch card. On the right is a wirework basket in a style that people make. So out of these, we made several works. And then the SA UK Connect project, it was a project to extend this to Cape Town, working with wireworkers in Cape Town. And at the moment in London, a show opened last week Thursday, and it's going to be on for this month, in which we're showing some of the Harare work and some of the work that we made in Cape Town.
So it's all him with this afterwards.
Okay. This lizard and this tortoise and the helicopter are coming out of the Cape Town workshop. So they're just very simple. All of the stuff is pretty rudimentary, but in fact it takes a long time to do even this level of work in terms of combining handicraft and learning something new. And then this is a work that I'm quite excited about. Literally on the night before I left Cape Town, I'd been hearing about this one wire worker, Lewis, who makes really amazing work that I'd seen, and people had recommended him to me and said, you've got to meet this guy. And then he turned up at my studio along with some people that I knew, and he'd brought this bird and said, would I put this on the show in London? So.
No, it's just that we seem to I don't know, maybe R&D's got it, or Andrew probably know a lot more than me. I don't think I've ever seen it before.
So he's immediately pushed the project way forward on the mechanical level by doing some more sophisticated mechanisms. And so I'm looking forward to working with him when I get back to Cape Town. So you can see next to each work is a sort of explanation account by the authors. Okay. So, in terms of reflection, a lot of what I've been doing has been focused on making, and I'm aware that there's a lot of thoughts that I have and ideas that I have and notes that I have around what I'm doing, and probably my next task is to work out how to communicate the structure of what I'm doing. But some of my thoughts around it are, one of the things that's come up is through working with wire workers, I'm learning about their culture and their approach to making. One of the areas that I've come across as a way of framing this is ethnomathematics. Ethnomathematics looks to find maths in sort of non-mathematician places, so where people are practicing maths without necessarily thinking of it as mathematics. And an example of this is that there's a branch of mathematics called topology, which is about sort of surfaces and shapes. A famous topological problem solved by Euler was to do with the 7 bridges of Königsberg, and it was this long-standing riddle of, could you walk across the 7 bridges of Königsberg without crossing any twice and get back to your position? And no one could work it out for centuries, as far as I could understand. Euler invented a proof to say that actually you couldn't, so they were right that they weren't able to solve it. But he proved it. And something that wire workers do, which I find fascinating, is that their aim with anything that they make is to make it out of one piece of wire. So they try and work out where you should start and how you can make the entire mainframe out of one piece of unbroken wire. And to do that is very difficult. I've tried to do it with making my own projects. And to not double back on yourself and to get that right is very tricky. But they say that if you can't do it with one piece, you shouldn't do it, so you should start again and try and work it out. So I felt like I chatted to them about this. I feel like they're practicing a kind of topology in what they're doing. And if you just want to see a quick reference here, this is a document by the ethnomathematician Paulo Guedes, who died fairly recently. He's a Mozambican guy. And this is some of his workshop material, where he talks to mathematics teachers, and he asks them, so you're mathematics educators, are you not? So let us see if you're good at mathematics. Do you know how to construct a circle given its circumference? What is the minimum number of strips of paper you need in order to be able to plait a border strip, etc.? Can you fold an equilateral triangle? He gives them 5 minutes, nobody can solve them. And he says, let me say to you that many of our illiterate Mozambican artisans know how to solve these problems, obviously formulated in a different way. So I think, I mean, the name ethnomathematics is kind of provocative, I guess, because on the one hand, you might say, well, why isn't it just mathematics? Is it phrased as a lesser kind of mathematics? But I think the intention of it is actually more of a radical intention of saying people practice mathematics in these practical ways, and they have this embedded indigenous knowledge through handicraft, which it actually is elevated actually by this field rather than denigrated. Another way I'd conceive of this project is as a kind of design fiction. So this again comes from the work of Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby around critical design. Because part of the motivation of this project really comes from being in a situation, seeing work that people are doing, and imagine it being pushed one step further. And to do more than just imagine it or write about it, one can try and make it. So we're making, in a sense, fictional artifacts. There's a kind of an artifice involved of taking ideas, talking to people, putting them together, and trying to create something new. And in a way, it's a kind of science fiction in real life. So you're making objects which enact this future. And I was really excited when I saw these trees appearing on the streets of Cape Town within the last year, which are baobab trees with very bright blue LED lights on them that are bought from Chinese shops and put onto these trees. Because first time I saw them pulling up to a robot, it was like a real Blade Runner scene of these cold blue LED lights. And it seemed like some of these ideas were already appearing. I also see this as an art intervention. So an artistic intervention really refers to having art that doesn't just live in the gallery, but takes place in the real world or in the outside space. So I'm creating change in the world. And this is, you could compare this to my 14-year-old car. I didn't make this though. This is made by a wire worker called Bongani. After doing one of our workshops, just being introduced to the idea that you could hack a toy and do something with it, he went to the supermarket, bought an MP3 player radio with a USB stick connection, and then made a wirework car where the radio sits in the dashboard and you can play tunes on the car radio. So it's an Audi. So I am gratified that even with the little bit that I've been able to do, the idea is already appealing to people and they're already doing it on their own initiative. And that's something that's great with working with a group like Wireworkers, is that they're totally tuned to innovation and picking up knowledge. And then I'd also say it's an art and design project in which I'm interested in creating new aesthetic forms. And that's another output that I'd like to have, is sculptures, kinetic sculptures that might go into a gallery. If they're design pieces, they might go into a design shop and be sold. And I'm working on that strand as well. So there is a kind of design fiction strand, an intervention strand, an art and design strand, and something that I'm thinking of as the African Robot Academy, which would be a sort of an educational institute where people would learn how to make these things and go and make them in their own spaces. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Ralph. That was great. Do you want to? Yeah. There. So I'm just going to start with a few questions, and then we can open it up for people to ask. So I just wanted to start with just some very practical questions about the wire workers.
Yeah.
So how did they come to you? I mean, when you were speaking about the Harare thing, I got the impression that there was a group there, and you were kind of catapulted in on top of them. Or how does it work? Yeah,
it works differently in different contexts. Yeah. So the first wire worker I worked with was literally from speaking to someone at the traffic lights and going, I'm interested in you making something, would you be interested in doing it? And in fact, people in South Africa do that quite often. Like if they want something made, they go to a wire worker and ask them to do it. So that was the one way of doing it. And then in Harare, it was actually organized by the festival that those wire workers were actually paying to be on the festival. So they were paying a daily fee in US dollars of like $15 US a day to have a table there on which they sold their work.
Yeah.
And then I paid them a comparable amount, about the same amount, to spend half of their day with me.
Okay.
And then they worked on my work, or actually on their work, I guess. But payment for me is one way in which you can try and equalize the relationship, even though we try and talk about it as much as possible to make explicit what's happening. Yeah. But I feel like if I ask someone to spend time with me instead of making their own work and selling it, then I'm potentially impacting on their income. So I always pay people by the hour for the time they spend me, even if that's not productive time, if it's time that we are in class or visiting a science museum or doing something like that.
And you mentioned, you showed the beautiful mechanical bird from, I think you said the guy's name is Lewis who made it. So did he just hear of this and make something himself and come to you? So he hadn't directly engaged with the workshops up to then?
He hadn't directly engaged, but his friend Bongani, who made the car, he'd said, Lewis is this great wire worker, you should talk to him. He lives out of town, but when he comes in, I'll make sure he sees you. So he came and he showed me this thing that he'd made. So
it kind
he wants to be involved. I mean, wire workers have they have very interesting reach. So you might see someone at the traffic lights and assume, I don't know, that they're just very localized. But once I've started working with wire workers, I've seen that someone might have a client in America, for example, who they've met somehow in Cape Town. They've kept contact, and now this American sort of trader sends them boxes with pre-made labels to send stuff back to them. They also employ other people to sell their work at different markets in Cape Town. So they're actually very entrepreneurial and actually have this international reach.
And how many wire workers are there in Cape Town?
There are hundreds, definitely.
Right, so. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how you see this as kind of interventionist art? I just wanted to just hear a little bit more about.
I think, well, for one thing, it's just that general idea of art in the world instead of art in the gallery. And also I think it's, quite literally, I feel like I'm intervening as in inserting something into a system. And that's often a way that interventionist artists work, is they identify a system in society. I think you remember from my PhD, there was an example of the Brazilian interventionist artist Childo Moreira.
I always quote that artist, and now you're quoting it.
So he had his Coca-Cola project where he printed white writing on the outside of Coca-Cola bottles in the same font as the ingredients. But one of them was a recipe for a Molotov cocktail, for example, and then he put them back into circulation because they were bottles returned for deposit. So I think there's a way in which interventionist artists identify a system in society and try and insert something into it. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm seeing the system in operation and thinking, can I put something into it and see what happens with it?
And so can I ask you what you might think is a difficult question about that? So I was thinking when I was looking at your photographs of the exhibition in London that you'd put something into their system, but you were the only person in London at the exhibition, and I was wondering how you felt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely aware of it, and I think that it's basically practical, that. I mean,
obviously there's a financial.
A cost. It's like I received funding which was enough to pay for me to go there, and it would be great if the guys that I was working with could be there as well, but there isn't the funding to support it.
But so was there were the people who worked with you interested in the fact there was an exhibition in London and kind of want feedback on it, or is it something that...
So we have like a WhatsApp group, and I sent them photographs of the exhibition opening and the works, and they said awesome. So that was good.
And we were talking a little bit about this before. So when you as an artist are working with a group of people who are also making and designing, where kind of do you feel your authorship begins and ends on the other person's?
Yeah, at the moment, my authorship in working with them has been quite minimal because basically the structure of it is we sit around the table together, and because I'm also a teacher, I've done a lot of lecturing and teaching and running workshops, I'm kind of in that mode as well. But what I do when I work with art students is help them to realize their projects. So I'll be questioning and proposing things.
So you see yourself much more in teacher mode in that context.
Yeah, so it'll be like, let's draw up a list of all the possible things you could make, and we go like tortoise, lizard, shark, what can we do? And then I say, well, here are the possibilities. We could make some lights flash, we could make a motor move. How shall we assign that to the different projects? And so we work it out that way.
And you do seem to be very motivated, I suppose, you know, when you showed some really nice pictures about kind of the notion of simple machines and these kind of mechanical ideas, and you're very motivated about, I suppose, spreading those. So do you think this thing, like, is scalable beyond, you know, are you finding that you were talking there about the wire workers having a, you know, a very good reach, that this can kind of be passed on further, or do you think it just depends on your efforts currently?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because, for one thing, I don't have that knowledge already. You know, I have access to knowledge, and I think that's probably a whole other subject.
Yeah,
is how a lot of the maker movement relies on people having access to internet forums, and also like the little bit of knowledge that enables you to get a lot more knowledge. And the wire workers aren't so connected to that. So I mean, I don't know a whole lot about mechanics, but I know how to find out about it.
And you have lots of friends, I suppose, who know things.
But something that was interesting is that for the mechanics for the lizard and the tortoise that we looked at, we learnt those mechanics from looking at other Zimbabwean mechanical toys that they had seen around but didn't know how they worked. So it's actually, you don't have to even look for knowledge from a faraway place. You can look for knowledge locally and make these small connections in order to achieve it.
And this was a question that struck me just in the context of, I had asked you this before about the name. So I like the name African Robots, and it kind of seems really interesting. But in another way, I was thinking about this, and I said to you earlier, is that also a negative name, that it's saying, you know, that's the sophistication of a robot that you can expect from Africa? That's kind of, I was just wondering that.
Yeah, and I have thought of that before. Is like if I'm producing these sort of, in some senses, deliberately rudimentary objects and saying this is an African robot, what does that say about the state of science and technology in Africa?
Yeah, especially in the context of the kind of global arenas of knowledge, where you're kind of saying, okay, you want to, I suppose, disrupt people's, I suppose, stereotypical images of...
So I guess, to be clear, there is obviously very high-level robotics happening in Africa in conventional research institutions. I think the name is it's very pop. It's a very pop name, and in fact, one of my also activist-y friends was like, "Why haven't you called it Southern African Robots? Because it's not really African robots." And then she was like, "I guess that's a bit long." So it's a kind of a name that just came up early on and stuck, and it's just meant to be very kind of pop and superficial, I guess. Yeah.
And just one thing before I open it out for questions. I had never heard the term ethnomathematics before, and is that in really widespread? It's a whole...
Yeah, and you can find it especially in things like basket weaving and textile weaving, where people are using mathematical principles in terms of even like emergent things that come out of those practices.
I mean, I suppose from an engineering mindset, I always think that, you know, obviously loads of things can be reduced to mathematics, but I didn't realize that people were studying, as you said, the kind of hidden. It's very, very interesting. I always find with your, you know, your work, for me anyway, it's kind of the ideas around it and all the avenues that you kind of take them that is actually so very fascinating. So on that point, I'll check. Does anyone have any questions? There's a question here.
Yeah.
The fact that you're using art as a means to open up the potential of technology to these artists and what technology can do. You mentioned actually the possibility of them learning applications that could be applied to perhaps practical things in their lives, but I'm interested in are there other areas of potential for that type of interface between art and technology, you know?
Well, Linda is, of course, the engineering and the arts professor. Professor has the professorial chair. So, it's a very live area. Yeah, I'm personally very interested in the intersection of art and technology, and it's returning things to a much older root. But yeah, Linda, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge area, and I think people work in it. If I was to summarise it, so there's enormous amounts of activities, and in the area that I come from, when people talk about STEM subjects like science, technology, engineering, and maths, there's now the acronym STEAM. There's an acronym for everything, where the arts is inserted there, and there's a huge recognition that is I think has a lot to offer. So I think it has a lot to offer. People treat it from the completely superficial way. It's a way of kind of making something sound attractive that other people might think is dull, right down to a kind of a much more in-depth way where creative practices allow you to actually see things in all sorts of different ways in those subjects that you otherwise wouldn't see. So I think there's a whole range of those kind of activities emerging more and more in mainstream institutions and in in artist-led studios. So you see it everywhere these days, which I think is a good sign. Is there?
Just wondering if you had any, like obviously you work with this and you have artists that work with you. There's obviously something about movement in the size and the sculptures that is engaging. Just, I work with mechanical sculptures myself, and I don't know what it is, but I'm just wondering if you had any insight into what it is that is appealing in that. Yeah.
Well, I think having animals as the subject is part of it, and I think birds in particular. Like the idea of a mechanical bird is really iconic. I mean, there's, for example, like Murakami has a novel called The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles. You have loads and loads and loads of varieties of toy birds that move. There's something mechanical about them. So I think that I don't know, okay, birds I'm a bit obsessed with as mechanical things, but I think looking more widely than that, humans are very keen to see life in things, and you give it even the slightest, most rudimentary element of life, like movement, and then we immediately like empathize and relate to it. So sometimes given presentations where we look at the way that people see faces in things. So you see car headlights, for example, you see a face in it, or a plug, you see a face. We're actually evolutionarily cued to see faces. And I think that there's something that we also are cued to is seeing life in things. And I think that there's an appeal in that. I think it communicates something very basic to us.
I think you were talking to me earlier, and you mentioned in this talk as well the whole idea that there's 6 simple machines, and that from those you can make any complex machine. But we're also talking about the kind of automaton nature and the whole idea that while individual movement and behavior are simple, you can actually create really complex patterns out of it. So I think the birds and the whole flock of birds, you just need to do a whole lot.
Yeah, exactly. I think
there's kind of lots of themes there that are rich in the movement.
Just to follow that thought as well, is that I collect other toys, and I've got Chinese birds that look very realistic and also move, but they don't appear alive in the same way that the very rudimentary bird does, because they look more like a kind of like a dead thing that's moving, whereas something that's very sketchy actually looks like it's struggling to be alive rather than it's something kind of dead that's been animated.
You're obviously very good at keeping things that you had from when you were young, having that car still, I was thinking.
I'm a bit of a hoarder, so
I did notice that a prominent feature on that car was the antenna. I was very proud of that, coming from the radio side of things. That's good. Any other questions? Question from here?
Is it easy for the people who do the wire making to learn how to use the electronic side of it?
It's completely new territory. I was going to say it's completely new territory. It's largely new territory. Some of it's a bit familiar, but I think being exposed to, say, hobby electronics, it is really quite a specialized field, and if you've never come across it before, it's quite alien. But what they do get very quickly is if you can accomplish something, and you can let's just follow it like a recipe. You put together a circuit, and we also went to the electronics shop to see where you buy the chips, and that's kind of how a lot of people start as well, as just following a recipe like a cookbook, and you put things together.
I remember actually ages ago working with some artists who were in the electronics department where I was, and they had totally different ways of dealing with circuits. So this might seem really obvious to the artists in the audience, but they would take photographs of things to remember patterns as well. And as an engineer, you'd think, I wouldn't think of doing that. And I thought, you're right, there's kind of recipes people can tap into. Do you, I know there's a question coming here, but you were talking to me as well, actually, yesterday about the kind of state of education in South Africa, and that does feed into this, going back to the comments you made about how easy it is, depending on where you live, to access extra information. But there is a whole generation, isn't there, of kind of issues around education that...
because of the history of apartheid in South Africa, there was a very poor education for most people, and then since '94, unfortunately, it hasn't improved very much. whereas Zimbabwe had a great education system introduced after independence. Yeah. So lots of Zimbabwean migrants to South Africa are pretty well educated. Yeah. And yeah, I guess that makes things easier.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a question from here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had considered approaching it from the other way of approaching the electronics workers or the cell phone sellers or toy sellers.
Good question.
Yeah.
Introduce them to the
that was that was definitely an original intention, and not something that I've really tackled. Maybe partly in that whenever I've interacted with the cell phone repair people, they just don't seem very open to doing something out of the ordinary. I guess you have to find the right individual. But maybe there is something at play there around the cultures of art and technology. Is that the artists are interested in getting into the other field, but the people working in that field aren't necessarily looking at the applications outside of their field.
And in one sense, it's kind of a pity, because I think from some of the things that you've shown me in the past, like the level of creativity that's applied to solving technical problems in South Africa is just amazing.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of all of the things to do with generating electricity and alternative ways to power things, opening up kind of small, on-the-spot kind of workshops. So I think there's a great overlap in the kind of levels of creativity and craftsmanship.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a pity that you couldn't more easily push the other way.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably will take a bit more work to do it. And I was saying to Linda that when I went to Brazil and I was in these electronic supermarkets, it seemed like Brazil is maybe more ready for the project than South Africa is. They have much higher levels of education and they have much more activity going on around that area. So maybe it's just the context.
Any other questions?
You mentioned you were very interested in pattern. I'm just wondering, have you ever considered collaborating with textile artists to maybe wrap your wire in textile? Or?
Yeah, I have collaborated once before with textile workers in making a tapestry, and yeah, I could see the possibilities in that. There's also one of the images I showed you is a basket with a kind of a colourful spiral coming out of it, and that's actually made out of Scooby wire, which is the telephone wire that we work with. So you can achieve something that's very similar to textiles and weaving with telephone wire as well. Yeah.
There's a question up here. So that's how long did it take to make? I'm just repeating before the microphone got there.
Yeah, well, when I made the second one, I recorded my time on it because I was trying to balance it against the sort of the funding I'd got for it, which unfortunately I was like way over what I'd budgeted for. But I spent about 40 hours on it, and the wire worker would have spent about 12 hours on it. And then there was some electronics work. So yeah, I'd say probably like 50 to 60 hours, I'd say, in the Starling. And in fact, working with the wire workers on making like the tortoise, the lizard, and the helicopter, we talked quite a bit because we were working together for several days at a time, spaced over a few weeks. And they were commenting on how when you make a new design, it's very slow. When they know a design, they're very quick. And that's what they actually aim for. They kind of mass-produce designs that they know. So they have a formula for making a car or a lizard or a fish, and they churn them out. But when they make a new design, everything like slows down radically. And that's something as an artist I can relate to as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? There's a question here.
Where's all the wire coming from? I know some of it's telephone, but is it recycled?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, it's actually the wire that they use is actually quite conventional. It's galvanized fencing wire, and they get it in all different kinds of thicknesses, and they have a very like explicit knowledge of what gauge of wire they should use for each thing, and they use about 5 different gauges of wire.
But do they buy in that wire, or do they?
Yeah, they buy it.
Is it recycled from something?
They just buy it packaged in reels from a conventional shop. It's like a repurposed piece of hardware, really. Yeah, it's on a spool. And then the telephone wire historically used to probably be, ripped out of the telephone boxes, but now we buy that as well. Yeah.
Okay. The world is so tame.
Yeah. Owen, yeah.
I love your jacket.
I asked him that earlier too.
Well, actually, this is I'm going to show you the back of the jacket because it's actually quite a special design. It says 1940 on it, and it says 6 bougies, and bougies are spark plugs. This fabric is actually from the 1940s, from the Congo, and in admiration of 6-cylinder cars that came into operation in the Congo in 1940. But yeah, I can hook you up to speak to me after the show.
Yeah. And just before we finish up, your exhibition's on in London, and you're co-doing it with Technology Will Save Us.
That's right, yes.
I want to say, does that really mean that, or are they being sarcastic?
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that. No, I think they kind of mean it, but again, maybe it's like the African robots, a bit pop. But Technology Will Save Us, I should have actually said more about them there. They're my UK partners. That we haven't done much work so far on the project, but we're doing work going forward. And they produce educational kits for kids. And they've just involved with this contract to supply 1 million British school kids with a little microcomputer through the BBC. So yeah, they're a very dynamic, growing company that also believes in democratizing access to technology. So they teach people how to use technology.
And is that was that a company that was originally set up in London, or did it come from elsewhere?
It's a London company, but I know the guy who runs it from South Africa for the last 20 years or something. So yeah.
And you actually commented to me as well that when you were in London, that there was just maker stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that does seem to be.
Maker everything, like literally opening up several magazines from different sources, and like Sainsbury's has like a maker something, I don't know what it is. So it is a great idea and a great movement, but I'm also wondering how it's become so visible right now. I mean, it's been around for quite a long time, the concept of making and makers,
it seems to be,
but it seems to be
commoditized hugely now.
Yeah, it seems to be having its moment. What did you call that curve?
The Gartner hype cycle, have anyone heard of those hype cycles where you look at how technology, how much hype there is around technology, and there's a thing called, come to the peak, and then there's the trough of disillusionment that comes after that. So for example, Internet of Things, one of the areas I'm in, is at the peak at the moment in terms of hype, as distinct from terms of practicality yet, and it's about to enter the trough of disillusionment. But on that unhappy note, I'd like to thank Ralph hugely for a very interesting, and I always, as I said earlier, you just think so much and in such different ways about your work, and you're so generous about sharing those ideas. So I really enjoyed it, and I just thank him very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Nice on time.